Hello, my name's Sophie and I'm from the Physical Interventions team. Today, the Physical Interventions team are going to do a quick demonstration on patient bed restraint, which is one of our most widely used restraint techniques within the Trust. Just a couple of things I want to draw your attention to before we start the demonstration. Firstly, if you need a little bit of guidance, go to the Physical Interventions folder in Trust documents on the group drive, and you will see that there are some policies, amongst them the Management of Physical Interventions policy for adults, also Physical Interventions policy for children and young people, paediatrics. There are some other useful resources on that drive as well in the Physical Interventions folder. For example, we have things like risks of restraint, which will give you all the key risks of restraint, and we're just in the process of publishing some SOPs for our key restraint techniques, which are photographic SOPs to help you and to act as an aid memoir. For the purposes of this demonstration video, the team will be wearing gloves, but obviously we would be wearing PPE that would be appropriate to both the clinical area and the patient if we were doing this in real situation. Also to state that we will be doing this in slow motion just to make it really clear for you what we're doing. So in real life, this would be much faster. Okay, so this is a team approach. Really important that there are two of us here. Cannot restrain the arms effectively or safely on your own. So I'm making sure that Amy, my colleague, is ready. And we're going to approach the patient sideways on for safety reasons. And we're going to have our arms up so that we can deflect any strikes coming our way with the soft fleshy parts of our arms. But really importantly, we're going to go overhand to gain control of Ivan's arms. There'll clearly be a good rationale for why we're going to restrain Ivan. For the purposes of this demonstration, he's attempting to pull out safety-critical, life-preserving indwelling devices. We're coming in, we're cupping above the wrist and above the elbow, not directly on the actual joints, but just above. We're not gripping, you can see our hands are open. We're going to guide the arms down to the sides of the patient, keeping them as close to the patient as possible. This is just gaining control of the arm. If we leave our hands in this position, Ivan could strike out laterally through our thumbs here because the thumbs are the weakest part of the grip or the hold. So what Amy and I are going to do is turn to an underhand hold. I'll just do that again in slow motion. So you will notice that we didn't take our hands off the arm, we kept contact. We reversed our hold to an underhold, like this, and this hand is coming down, cupping the elbow here to stop this lateral movement out. So from here, it's really important to note that all of the weight that Amy and I have, all of our kinetic energy, is going through our knuckles into the mattress, not actually through our thumbs into the patient's arm. So there should be no gripping and grabbing. There may still be bruising to the patient's arm if they're resisting, which presumably they would be if we were having to restrain. So just be very careful. So from here, this is now the underhand hold. You will notice that we're in our manual handling body weight transfer positions here to support our back. And all of our kinetic energy is coming through into containing and controlling that arm. This is the lowest form of arm restraint for the bed. And what I would ask is if you can get away with this, absolutely marvellous. Don't go up to the next levels that we're going to demonstrate now. From here, as I said, if we can get away with this lowest level of arm restraint, that's exactly what we need to do. However, let's imagine that I lost control now of Ivan's arm. He's actually managed to break free a little bit. Perhaps I'm worried that he's going to punch my colleague or take out that critical indwelling device. What I don't want to be doing is gripping hold of his arm now and pulling it down. Definitely would create bruising and injury, and also I might escalate his behaviours. I'm going to use the patient's movement to help me now, and I'm going to get into this elevated arm position. What I'm actually doing is blocking the patient's arm with the top of my thigh. Because his arms are protruding over the edge of the bed, I can easily do that standing up, Or I could do it sitting down. Sometimes sitting down is good because it brings me on a lower level with the patient, and I would be talking and reassuring the patient all the time, trying to keep him calm, trying to explain what we're doing, that we're just holding him safe. That's really important. As you will notice, Amy still has the straight arm. This isn't synchronized swimming. You don't both have to do exactly the same thing. So if Amy can get away with the lower level restraint, that's fantastic. When we're moving into that elevated arm position, what I'm not doing is changing my hand position. My hands are staying exactly the same position in case I need to move into the next part of the hold, which is the figure of 4. Then my hands will be in exactly the right position. So let's imagine now maybe I've been sitting here for a couple of minutes, but perhaps the patient is now starting to bring their knees into my back, or my back is hurting a little bit because this is quite an unnatural position, so I now need to transfer. What I'm going to do is just say to my colleague one word, transferring. This is so that my colleague knows what I'm doing, but that the patient doesn't necessarily know what I'm doing. This is the most vulnerable part of the technique, and this is where if anybody is going to break out of the restraint, they would break out of it, which is why I'm only using one word, transferring. At this point, I'm going to stand up. The moment my hands are staying in exactly the same position, I'm going to sit down or kneel down if there isn't a chair available. As I'm sitting down, the hand that's above the elbow is going to snake under the patient's arm, over their forearm, and grab my own wrist. This is called the figure of 4. Once I'm in that figure of 4 and I'm confident that I'm in it, I'm going to say one more word to my colleague, secure. This way Amy knows that I've got a good hold, that I'm feeling confident that I'm secure, and if Amy wanted a transfer, this would now be her prompt that she can transfer. Let's think about safety. Let's think about our safety, staff safety. First thing you will notice if I'm in a seated position is my legs are spread, giving me a wide, stable base, so that if we are jostling around a little bit, which we probably would be, I'm not going to topple over. Okay, so that's really important. You will also notice that I'm not really leaning in really close to the patient, because number one, that's bad for my back, but number two, I don't want to be too near just in case there's any attempt to bite or spit, because there might be. So I'm fanning out at the top. Patient safety. This is a really secure hold, but it can have a tendency to hyperextend the patient's shoulder here. So really important that the elbow on your inside arm spikes the mattress really hard. If I show you here, it will look like this. I'm spiking the mattress. That will take the pressure off the patient's shoulder and minimize that hyperextension. And it's really important that you consider this as well if your patient has chest stenosis, because you don't want to be putting too much pressure on there. From here, I could be in the figure of 4, and Amy could be in the straight arm hold. But if those legs are an issue, maybe now Amy needs to transfer.
Transferring.
So you will notice that Amy is doing exactly the same as myself. Secure?
Secure.
Lovely, thank you. So perhaps now the patient is starting to relax a little bit. And Amy and I need to try and help the patient relax. If we're in this high level hold, it's going to be very difficult for the patient to relax. So there are several ways of doing that. This will also aid if you're really worried. This will also help if you're really worried about that hyperextension of the shoulder. We could just guide the arms down the bed a bit, but re-spike on that figure of 4. So this is a looser figure of 4 now. If the patient's starting to become challenging again, we could bring that figure of 4 back up and again re-spike. If the patient was really starting to calm now, actually, let's give him a bit of a helping hand here. I'm going to remove the hand that was on the patient's wrist away, as is Amy. But we're keeping this hook on. This hook is really, really important, because if Ivan were to suddenly become aggressive again, he might try to punch us or hit up to us, and this long bone here, body mechanic, will block that movement really nicely. Also, if Ivan started to move his arms around to try and break free again, we could just straight away go back into the figure of 4. So this is the arm restraint, and what I would suggest is if you can just get away with the arm restraint and not restrain the legs, that would be ideal. So now we're going to show you how to do the leg restraint, just to remind you how to do that. For your safety, if you're doing the leg restraint, it's really important that you make sure that the arms are being securely restrained first. Otherwise you could end up in a very dangerous situation. To reiterate, if you don't need to restrain the legs, please don't. But here we go. Here's Richard. He's going to hold his pillow up, which is going to really help him with this. It's going to protect him. It's also going to protect the patient as well. Richard's going to come in, sideways stance. He's going to drop the pillow over the patient's knees and thighs, bringing his inside leg in front of him into an L shape to block the patient's leg on the opposite side. You will notice that his elbow has gone down onto the bed, the flat of his arm along the bed, and all of his body weight is going through that elbow, not into the patient. He's gripped hold of the pillow either side, and he's not looking directly at the patient, he's looking off to the side. Because what we don't want to do is to be in a confrontational situation with the patient, staring directly into the patient's eyes. It's really important if you're doing the leg restraint that you face upwards towards the patient. This is for your safety, so at all times you can see what's going on with the arms. Also, you are in a position to be able to just glance across at the patient's face to make sure that everything's okay, they're not discolouring in the face, and that their breathing is normal, or breathing is as it should be. From here, Richard would be the first person to leave. So he's going to check with us, and we're just going to give him the nod to leave. And that is exactly how he leaves, with the pillow still up, just in case the patient lashes out with a kick. So when the patient has de-escalated, calmed down, and you're ready to leave, it's really important that you and your colleague on the arms leave together. We're just blocking the elbow here, keeping control of the wrist. We're both going to leave at exactly the same time. I want you to imagine everything from the patient's mouth down to their groin is a big red triangle of danger. Do not lean on it, because obviously we don't want to interfere with the mechanics of breathing. Don't want to do anything that's going to impede the patient's breathing. Do not interfere with it in any way, shape or form. The other thing that I would just mention to you is you cannot safely or effectively do bed restraint with the bed rails up. They will be a complete hindrance to you and to the patient. Even the most simple things, if I was to come in and try and take control of this arm and move to the underhand hold, now with that kinetic energy and movement, I'm literally hitting my own arms against the bed rails. It would be impossible to get into that elevated position or even into the figure of 4 with the bed rails up. And there is no way that we would be able to get access to the legs. So really important that the bed rails are down. The final thing I just want to mention to you, this is in the rare instance that your patient will try and build up momentum by bringing their head up and down to try and break out of the arm restraints. This isn't a restraint, it's an actual block. I'm going to stand at the head of the bed, and I'm going to place my hands in a cross above the patient's head, so that if the patient starts to rock up, I'm just going to block it. That will stop the momentum from building up. It's very effective. Please note that there is no contact between the patient and myself unless the patient rocks up into my hand. My hands are flat so that my fingers don't end up in the patient's eyes or in the patient's mouth. I'm standing in my body weight transfer position to keep my spine neutral, and I'm holding my hands close to my body so I'm not overextending, putting pressure on my lower back.